Hi everyone. I'm going to be presenting our findings on the association between RRBs and adaptive functioning. This study was a collaboration between the Autism Child and Family Lab at Hebrew University and the Autism Center at Asaf HaRofeh. And I would also like to mention my co-authors and collaborators, Shai Netzer-Hellman, Noy Rutko, Analia Shefer, Ditza Zakor from Asaf HaRofeh, and Judah Klor, the head of the Autism Child and Family Lab. So first of all, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're talking about RRBs, which stands for Restricted Repetitive Patterns of Behaviors, Interests, or Activities. These behaviors may be expressed by repetitive motor rhythms, repetitive speech or object use, and restrict interest routines and rituals. Relative to social and communication deficits, the research on RRBs has been limited, and much remains unknown about their function and about their effect on the individual's day-to-day functioning. Recently, measurement techniques of RRBs have developed and improved our understanding of the different types of behaviors that belong to the symptoms group, along with different frameworks for categorizing all these different behaviors. So one framework conceptualizes RRBs as lower order and higher order, as you can see on the first row. Lower order RRBs have also been referred to as repetitive sensory motor behaviors, and behaviors in this category include repetitive motor stereotypic behaviors such as hand flapping, stereotypic or repetitive vocalizations, and repetitive actions with objects. Higher order RRBs have also been referred to as insistence on sameness behaviors, behaviors which include intense and restricted interest, ritualized behavior patterns, excessive adherence to routine, and a resistance to change. Another prominent and more nuanced framework to conceptualize the different behaviors that belong to this group divides them into 6 subcategories, as you can see on the bottom row: self-injurious, stereotyped, restricted, compulsive, ritualistic, and sameness behaviors. These 6 subcategories can all be measured by the Repetitive Behavior Scale Revised, or the RBSR, which is the measure that we used in our study, and I will explain in a bit why. And while these different subcategories have been found to be distinct from one another, they've also been found to strongly correlate with each other, and factor analysis of the RBSR showed that they divide into 5 common factors. As you can see on the third row, ritualistic and sameness behaviors joined into one factor. Even though our understanding of RRBs has advanced, their function remains largely unknown. Some RRBs, such as stereotypic behaviors, are regarded as having a self-regulating function, and they may serve to reduce anxiety, while other types of RRBs, such as self-injurious behaviors, are presumed to be maladaptive and detrimental to learning and development, while other types of RRBs, such as restricted interest, may serve to bring enjoyment and satisfaction to the individual. Attitudes towards RRBs also differ. While some argue that RRBs necessitate intervention, others claim that they serve as a self-regulatory and as a means to communicate emotion, and therefore treatment should not aim to eliminate them. In order to conceptualize whether RRBs are worthy of our intervention or not, we must first understand if and how they affect development. And in our study, we chose to look at chronological development, which brings us to the question of how do RRBs change with age. So there are 2 main trends that have been found that I will focus on. So first of all, RRBs have been found to be less frequent and less severe among older individuals than younger individuals. And second of all, it has also been found that younger children tend to express more lower order RRBs, while older children express more higher order RRBs. That same framework that we saw in the previous slide. So there is a consensus that RRBs do change with age, either quantitatively or qualitatively. Now that we've looked at RRBs, what we examined in our study is if and how they relate to adaptive functioning. Adaptive functioning is a general term for the collection of conceptual, social, and practical skills that help individuals function in sufficient ways on a daily basis. This includes skills such as communication, understanding and expressing language, for example, daily living skills such as hygiene and safety, and also socialization skills, for instance, forming friendships and taking part in leisure activities. These skills develop with age as the individual becomes more independent, and they also become more difficult as society's expectation of our daily functioning grows. Individuals with autism show significant deficits in adaptive behavior, with their functioning in this area delayed compared to their neurotypically developing peers. While in the neurotypical population, adaptive functioning has been found to correlates strongly with cognitive functioning, such that individuals with lower cognitive abilities show lower adaptive functioning and are more dependent on others. In autistic individuals, there's a consensus that they show this significant deficit, so that there is a gap between their chronological and cognitive growth and their progress in adaptive functioning. And while this gap does exist, studies also show us strong correlations between adaptive functioning and cognitive functioning in autistic individuals, with stronger correlations in older individuals than younger individuals. And they also show us that adaptive skills can improve with age, with socialization skills usually improving the least and daily living skills improving the most. One way to explain these findings is to consider how higher cognitive functioning may help the individual better learn adaptive behaviors, so that higher cognitive abilities in the early years may be responsible for the gains that we see in behaviors that are considered adaptive. The literature regarding the association between adaptive functioning and autism symptomatology yields various results, and methodological differences between studies make drawing one conclusion difficult. For instance, as you can see on the top here, it has been found that cognitive functioning and autism symptom severity moderate the relationship between age and adaptive functioning, while other studies on that second row have shown that age, cognitive functioning, and social and communication symptoms associate significantly with and help predict adaptive behaviors, while RRBs only weakly associate or not at all, and they do not contribute to our ability to predict adaptive functioning. In contrast to these studies, studies focusing on correlations have found a significant negative correlation between RRBs and adaptive behavior, such that the higher the severity of the RRBs, the lower the adaptive functioning. Significantly, recurring sensory motor behaviors have been found in numerous studies to associate negatively with adaptive behavior, so that children showing high levels of these types of RRBs may show lower adaptive communication and socialization abilities. Self-injurious behavior is the only subcategory of RRBs for which there is a consensus on its detrimental effect on adaptive functioning. And I will return to this point in a second. Significantly, the majority of the studies in this field and the studies that I just mentioned use diagnostic measures to evaluate RRBs, either the ADOS or the ADI. And while these measures do take into account the various types of behaviors that belong to this group, they're not aimed at specifically evaluating RRBs. And also in the majority of these studies and analyses, only the total RRB score of the measure was used, representing the different types of behaviors that belong to this group as one single entity. That's why in our study, we chose to use the RBSR and look at the 6 different subcategories to see if and how they relate to adaptive functioning, and in that way to gain a more nuanced perspective on this relationship. So we examined if and how the 6 subscales of the RBSR associate with and help predict adaptive functioning in children ages 3 to 12 with autism. Our data was collected from a larger ongoing study of family accommodation among children with autism. Participants were children at time of diagnosis by an interdisciplinary team of experts trained in gold standard diagnostic practice at the Autism Center at Asafa Wafé. We analyzed all data from children ages 3 to 12 at time of diagnosis, and our sample is heterogeneous in clinical characteristics of the children, for example, their symptom severity, cognitive functioning, and adaptive functioning. In alliance with the consensus that RRBs change either qualitatively or quantitatively with age, we stratified our samples into 2 groups. Group 1 of younger children ages 3 to 5, and Group 2 of older children ages 6 to 12. We used the Vineland to measure adaptive functioning using the overall adaptive behavior composite standard score, or the total Vineland score as I will refer to it, to measure adaptive functioning, the 6 subscales of the RBSR as I mentioned, and we also included cognitive functioning in our analysis due to the effect that we see in the literature. So this was measured using either the IQ or the developmental quotient depending on the child's age, using either the Mullen, the WIPSI, or the WISC. And to explore how the different subtypes of RRBs correlate with and predict adaptive functioning, we used the bidirectional stepwise regression model to predict adaptive functioning using the 6 different subscales as predicting variables. We ran our models separately for each age group, and we also ran our models 3 times in each age group. The first time, we only included 5 subscales. We excluded self-injurious behaviors because of its previously established maladaptive effect. The second time we ran the model, we introduced self-injurious behaviors to see if and how they affect our results. And in the third model, we also included the IQ or the DQ based on the child's age to see if RRBs can help us better predict adaptive functioning more than just cognitive functioning on its own. So our results, for age groups 3 to 5, all of the RRB subcategories significantly and negatively correlated with adaptive functioning, with Pearson coefficients ranging from medium to strong. So this shows us that the more severe the presentation of the different types of RRBs, the lower the adaptive functioning. And the model explaining the most variance in the violent total score was our third model, which included the IQ or the DQ, ritualistic, stereotypic, and compulsive behaviors, together explaining 59% of the variance in adaptive functioning. Interestingly, as you can see, our first two models did not differ at all. Adding self-injurious behaviors did not affect our results as we predicted. Restricted, ritualistic, and stereotypic behavior contributed to the ability, explained 44% of the variance and contributed to the ability to predict adaptive functioning. For age groups 6 to 12, except for restricted behavior, all of the other subcategories significantly and negatively correlated with adaptive functioning, with Pearson coefficients ranging from weak to medium. And the model best explaining adaptive functioning was a second model, which included only self-injurious behaviors and explained 18% of the variance. As you can see, IQ was also a significant predictor, but it stood on its own and explained 14% of the variance. And when neither IQ nor stereotypic nor self-injurious behavior, were included in the models, only stereotypic behavior contributed to the ability to predict adaptive functioning, and it explained 6% of the variance. So to sum up, our results show a consistent negative correlation between the different RRB subcategories and adaptive functioning, so that the higher the severity of the RRBs, the lower the adaptive functioning. Interestingly, sameness behavior did not enter any of our models. One way to think about this is to consider the factor analysis of the RBSR, which we saw at the beginning, where ritualistic and sameness behavior joined into one factor, and ritualistic behavior did enter the models for younger children. Self-injurious behavior, while it was the most significant predictor of adaptive functioning in older children, did not enter any of the models for younger children. And while this shows us just how detrimental this symptom can be in school-age children, it also raises the question of why this relationship wasn't replicated in younger children. Perhaps self-injurious behaviors are expressed differently, or that other subtypes of RBs are more prominent, and we think this is a questions worth investigating future research on this symptom. And the differences between the models that we saw for younger and older children point to the role that age plays in this dynamic. So first of all, the correlations between RRBs and adaptive functioning were stronger in younger children than in older children. Secondly, more subtypes of RRBs contributed to the ability to predict adaptive functioning in younger children than in older children. And also, all of the models for younger children explain more of the variance in adaptive functioning than any of the models for older children. So it could be that RRBs manifested at an early age hinder adaptive functioning more than at a later age, or that at a later age, other aspects of development intervene and weaken this negative relationship that we see. It could also be that high levels of RRBs at an early age deter adaptive functioning and create a permanent deficit that remains with the child as he ages, even if the expression of his RRBs change. And there could be many other possible explanations, like possible mediating variables that we could not consider in our study, perhaps gender, anxiety, or executive functioning. So future studies should look at the possible mediators in this relationship. And also, our study was limited in that we used only parent report measures, and we only measured our data at one single time point. And one way we at the Autism Child and Family Lab are furthering this direction is to look at this relationship both in a longitudinal perspective, measuring the symptoms at different time points, and also using clinical observation tools like the OKRA, which keep this nuanced perspective on RRBs, but also further our knowledge of them and not just based on parent measures. And that's our study. Thank you for listening.